Good morning and welcome, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes to make sure that everybody who's joining today can finish logging into this call. I think we're ready to go. Welcome to this East West Railway Company online public event for Oxford to Bicester. My name is Claire Keith Anderson and I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at East West Railway Company. Following the launch of the second round of non-statutory consultation on the 31st of March, this week we're holding the second round of online events or webinars. The focus of this morning's session is on responding to the questions raised by communities to date. For those wanting more detailed dialogue with specialists from the project team, please attend any of our live chat events. And there's some details on the screen now. There are 2 to 3 sessions per week, 9 in total between now and the end of the consultation. This morning we will start with a quick run through of what we're consulting on in your area, but the focus of this morning's event is on responding to questions raised to date by yourselves. We are holding similar sessions across the whole route between Oxford and Cambridge throughout this week. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the rest of the team. Joining us today, we also have our Delivery Director for CS2, John Hillman, our Deputy Head of Operations, Christopher Cullerton, our Development Manager, Stephen Barker, our Environment and Sustainability Manager, Tristan Lincoln-Gordon, and our Land and Property Manager, Jern Pace. And we have Alison and James helping us behind the scenes. Before we start the presentation, I'm going to run through a brief housekeeping in Teams Live note. Many of you might be familiar with Teams Live, but just as a reminder, you'll be on mute throughout. Please note that we are recording these sessions and therefore will not reference any names or descriptions we have been given for GDPR reasons. That's all the housekeeping we have. Over to you, John. Many thanks.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Good morning to everybody and thank you for joining this East West Rail webinar. My name's John Hillman. I'm the Delivery Director for Connection Stage 2. That's the piece between Oxford and Bedford. This webinar is going to provide information around the public consultation, so it will go through information that's being presented both on the East West Rail website and equally within the documentation that's been sent out. We'll recap information within the documentation firstly, so as anybody joining that's not familiar with this information gets the opportunity to understand what we've said. And then we'll go into understanding and just refreshing some of the answers that we've defined based on current themes and information that people have presented to us up to date in the consultation documentation. In the past, we would have held face-to-face community events where we could have spoke to people face-to-face and listened to their questions and provided individual responses. Clearly, we can't do that very easily at the moment. So the idea of the webinar is that we'll reflect on what we've produced and what we've put out into the wider world for consultation, and equally the feedback we've had to date on certain issues which we'll be talking about. There will be an opportunity for people to continue to provide questions into the Q&A of this webinar, and there's a couple of reasons why we'd ask you to do that. One is that it helps us to continue to draw together information around people's views and for us to collect that so we can inform the consultation, and equally for us to be able to take a view then on other areas that we ought to be addressing further in consultation events. It's likely that we may take the hour to get through the slides. It does depend on the level of detail. If we don't get through a whole hour discussing the slides, then there will be an opportunity at the end for Q&A. So again, we'll take those questions that have come into the chat bar, and we'll use those to provide some questions and answer time with you today. It's really important that although this session is reflecting on what we've put into the consultation, that if you do want to raise specific questions with us, we do have a series of live events that Claire alluded to at the start. We've held 6 so far, and we've got a further 9 that we've got programmed. They're available by going onto the East West Rail website into the consultation room, and the times on the screen currently show those events. Should you wish to ask your question, then please come and join us at one of those events, and we will have people who are involved in the current design and the programme, and they will hopefully be able to give you a lot more detail about your specific question at those events. So please come and join us should you wish to do so. If you can't attend any of those events, we do have other opportunities for people to get in touch with us. You can still email your question over to us at contact@eastwestrail.co.uk, and we will get a reply out to you as soon as possible. So I would reiterate that although we can't take individual questions at this session, if we do have that time at the end for Q&A, we will attempt to do so. So I'm going to hand over now to Chris Cullerton in a short while, who will talk to us about customer service. But before I do that, I'll just cover off just making sure that people are aware of the size of the geographical area that this consultation will cover. We are talking about all the way through from Oxford through to Cambridge, which is a considerable route. It's the first time that we will have consulted directly with the whole route in one session. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Chris Cullerton. As I said, this is the Deputy Head of Operations, and Chris is going to talk to us about customer experience and operations within the consultation. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, John. Yes, I'm going to be talking to you about the customer experience and railway operations, which is part of the 10-week consultation. Of course, we're also consulting on the proposed infrastructure developments. So if we can just go on to the next slide, please. As it's important to note that as part of the customer experience, we're really keeping our minds open about what we might be able to offer. We want to be different. We want to offer a great customer experience for anyone using East West Rail services. So this is really where we're looking for feedback, either through this process, through contact@eastwestrail.co.uk, or through the feedback form as part of the consultation. We really want to know what you think works in current railway services, what doesn't work, and what you might like to see that's maybe completely different from what's on offer at the moment. That can be related to any of the touch points on the right hand side of the slide there. So the train service itself, the actual journey, but we're also aware that station experience is important, particularly if you're changing trains or waiting for a service, what kind of facilities people are after. The on-train experience itself, what you'd like to actually see on board the services, interaction with colleagues, interaction with the East West Rail staff, as well as more general customer information, be it electronic or even mobile related. So any of those aspects of customer experience that you have some thoughts on, please let us know. On the next slide, we're going to see the geographical area that we're looking at, obviously 6 separate areas regarding the infrastructure developments, and today we're interested in the first section there on the left in the light blue box between Oxford and Bicester. So I think now I'm handing back to John just to talk about that section, Oxford to Bicester specifically.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So the first couple of slides are a recap of what we've got in the consultation. So between Oxford and Bicester, which is obviously a railway line that's been open for a little while, stations and railway lines don't have the capacity to operate the additional services that East West Rail are planning to operate. So we will be looking at, and it will be discussed in a bit more detail as we go through this, but we're looking at various options around how we upgrade the route and the stations between Oxford and Bicester in order to facilitate the expected passenger growth that East West Rail will bring. Clearly, the introduction of the service between Oxford and Cambridge will bring more people, faster and more reliable services is what we're seeking to achieve. But it's important that in creating this connectivity that we also remember that reliability for passengers and customers is just as important. So one of the reasons that we're looking at some of these changes is all around managing that growth, but equally ensuring that we provide a reliable service for the future. And if you're not sure where to find the information on this section, it is contained in section A of the consultation documentation that's gone out. Next slide. So just briefly, what are we talking about then between Oxford and Bicester in respect of improvements? At Oxford Parkway and Bicester, the stations to accommodate more trains and more customers. So we're looking at what we need to do around passenger flows, around how we accommodate more people, what that means in respect of facilities, what that means in respect of the way people move around the station, and how that all comes together in what's provided. At Oxford, we are looking at different proposals, and we've got a working group with Network Rail and the wider industry where we're seeking to understand how East West Rail fits in with the additional growth plans that there are for Oxford over the next 10 to 15 years. So we're working closely with industry partners to understand what that means, and that could mean additional platforms, additional platform faces. It could mean additional track work, different track work, but at this point in time, that is very early in the stages of development. The other thing that we're looking at that obviously raises an impact is the implications on the level crossing at Bicester. Our proposals to introduce 4 more trains an hour in each direction will mean that obviously there is significant impact on the amount of time that barrier is down across the road. And at the moment, that could be in the region of up to 50 minutes in every hour. So we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail as we go through. Thanks. Next slide, please. So that's a brief recap on where we've got to with what's in the consultation document. And I'm going to hand over to Stephen Barker, the development manager, who's going to cover a number of questions, themes and issues that we've heard to date and provide some feedback on thinking at this present time. So thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, John, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, as John said, we're going to run through a few of the questions we've received now. As you might imagine, we get quite a lot of questions, but many of them are on very similar themes. We've tried to pick out some representative questions that cover the main themes that we've seen so far. As John has already said, if you do have further questions, and as well as our live chat sessions, there is an opportunity to put your questions into the chat bar now, and if there's time at the end, we'll try and address as many of those as we can. So first of all, we'll look at the London Road level crossing in Bicester. A quick recap of what it is we're proposing in that location. In the consultation document, we've set out 6 options that we would like views on for how to deal with the level crossing at London Road in Bicester. Level crossings are unfortunately a source of incidents and accidents on the railway. The UK has one of the best safety records on level crossings in the world, but sadly we do still see a significant number of incidents and accidents at crossings. And as well as the obvious safety issues, there can also be reliability issues for the train service arising from level crossings, both as a result of those incidents when they happen, but also the occasional failure of level crossing equipment. As a result of particularly the safety aspect of level crossings, we are under an obligation as a result of policy of the Office of Rail and Road to look at options to remove level crossings wherever we can. And so we've put forward 6 options here for things we could do at London Road to allow the crossing to be closed. Concept 1 would close the road at London Road and instead would provide an accessible bridge for what we're describing as non-motorised users. So that is, for example, pedestrians, cyclists and anyone not in a motor vehicle. Concept 2 would provide a road underpass on the same alignment as the current London Road. That would allow vehicles and pedestrians and so on to pass beneath the railway. Concept 3, again, is on the same alignment as the current London Road, but will provide a bridge over the top of the railway for both pedestrians and vehicles. Then concepts 4 and 5 are similar to 2 and 3, but instead of being on the same alignment as London Road, they would be slightly off to one side, in this case off to the west side of London Road. Concept 4 would provide an underpass to the west, and concept 5 would provide a new bridge over the top of the railway, just over to the west of London Road. And then finally we have concept 6. Concept 6 looks at a number of alternative locations for road crossings, and these are set out in a bit more detail in the consultation document. So the questions that we're going to go through today are on the screen now. What I'll do is I'll read each of the questions out as it appears there and then provide an answer for it. So the first question is, why does this crossing need to be closed? Could you provide a bit more detail on the number of trains using the crossing today and in the future? So that's a 2-part question. So we'll deal with the first part first, obviously. Why does the crossing need to be closed? Well, as I've just expressed, level crossings do present a bit of a safety risk. We're looking particularly at level crossings throughout the whole of the Oxford to Cambridge route. There are a number of crossings elsewhere on the line as well that we're looking at for closure. But in addition to that, the increases in the number of trains using the line would mean that the level crossing barriers would be down for a longer period of time each hour. And as a result, that would potentially create problems for both pedestrians and road vehicles wanting to travel in and out of Bicester. So we are looking at how we can provide an alternative option for people to cross the railway. In terms of the number of trains that use that section of railway, currently there are on average 2 trains an hour in each direction going over London Road. They form part of the existing passenger service that runs between Oxford and London Marylebone. In future, when the first part of East West Rail is opened between Oxford and Milton Keynes, that number will go up from 2 trains an hour in each direction to 4 trains an hour. And then when the rest of East West Rail comes online a bit later on, when trains are running through from Oxford to Bedford and on to Cambridge, that will become 6 trains an hour in each direction. In addition to the passenger trains, there are also some freight trains that will be using the railway. My colleague Chris will talk a bit more about freight a bit later on, but that will further add to the number of trains each hour going over the crossing at London Road, which will lead to a greatly extended number of minutes each hour for which the barriers are down and pedestrians and road users are unable to cross the railway. Moving on to the next question. Won't closing London Road to vehicles and forcing all traffic around the town via the A41 cut the town in half and make it more difficult to access the town centre from the south? We completely understand people's fears in this respect. Yes, it's certainly not our intention to cut the town in half. We don't want to do that. And that's why we've put forward the various options that we have, which include bridges and alternative routes that would allow traffic and pedestrians to continue to move across the railway. As we've said, there are 6 different concepts set out in our consultation. They all have pros and cons associated with them, so we're really keen to hear from people on their views on which of those they prefer, and also if you have any strong feelings about some of the advantages or disadvantages of any of those options, we'd really like to hear that. That will help us form our views going forward on which of the concepts we would take forward. The next question is, can more concepts be added for the London Road level crossing, such as a pedestrian underpass? Yeah, the whole purpose of this consultation is to understand, as I said, understand people's views. We've already heard from people a number of times that there is interest in providing an underpass just for pedestrians. Currently, that isn't included in the 6 options that we've presented. We do have underpasses that would be for both pedestrians and road vehicles, but we haven't put forward so far an option for just a pedestrian underpass. in response to all the questions we've had on this, we have decided that now we will investigate that. We will look at that as an additional option, and at our next stage of design work, we will be looking at the feasibility of providing just an underpass for pedestrians and also cyclists for that matter. And then the final question on this slide: have local residents and businesses been consulted, and how will they be compensated? So again, a two-part question. Taking the first part, have residents and businesses been consulted? Well, we do appreciate, obviously, that all these options do have impacts on local residents and businesses, either directly in terms of property impacts or perhaps less directly in terms of how people undertake journeys in and around Bicester. And that's really the purpose of this consultation. We're setting out our proposals here. This is the opportunity to provide feedback on those and tell us what you think about them, and provide other ideas for how we could make those options better. The design process is still at a very early stage. We are consulting very early in the process, which is relatively unusual in major infrastructure projects. But the reason we're doing that is because we want to hear feedback at a time when we're most able to take into account people's ideas, and we can change and improve designs to meet the needs and aspirations of a local community. On the point about how will they be compensated, I'd just like to bring in my colleague Jörn from our land and property team just to answer that one. Jörn, can you give us some thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, certainly, Stephen. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name's Jörn Pace. I'm Land and Property Manager for East West Rail. And so to kind of pick up where Stephen left off, our priority is to obviously avoid our negative impact in that regard, and my colleagues will touch on the steps we'll be taking during construction and our approach to the surrounding environment in order to mitigate those impacts to the local community. But in terms of support for the landowners and surrounding community, at the moment we're consulting on the need to sell scheme, and this is for those who are going through hardship and have a pressing need to sell but are unable to due to our proposals. And I will go into some further detail on this later in the webinar, but we want to hear your feedback, whether you think it's the right support for those potentially affected, but we'll pick up that again for later on. And in terms of later down the project timeline, there are statutory provisions available for landowners and business owners will abide by the statutory compensation code, and that's for those who are adjacent to the line of the railway and its infrastructure, and for those who are on the line of the railway. So we will be able to provide further information on the land requirements by the next round of consultation. So yeah, that's that. So I will now pass back to Stephen. Sorry, you continuing?
Yeah, it's me again.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jörn. Okay, so the next topic that we're looking at are station facilities. We've had a range of questions in about the proposed improvements to the stations on this section of the line. First question is, have you decided on a layout for the upgraded stations, and how will you decide? To answer the first part of that, at this stage, no, we haven't decided on a layout. We're still looking at that. How will we decide? Well, there are two aspects to how we would decide. First of all, we're looking at the anticipated numbers of people that will be using the stations in future. That will dictate things like how wide walkways have to be and so on. It will also help us with making sure that facilities such as waiting areas are of an adequate size and so on. But the other aspect of this is the bit that we touched upon earlier about customer experience. We're looking long and hard about what people actually want when they visit the railway station. For some people, obviously, they just want to be in and out as quickly as possible. Perhaps on their commute to work, will know the time of their train precisely, will arrive just before it leaves and be on board and away quick as anything. Other people, perhaps taking a slightly more leisurely journey through the station, will want to linger for a while. When we need to make sure that we've got the right sort of facilities for all the different types of people and different types of journeys that will be passing through the stations. So we'll be taking the feedback in particular from this consultation and using that to help us shape the different types of facilities and how they're laid out at each of the stations. The next question is, will we get to see the detailed designs for planned upgrades to Oxford, Oxford Parkway and Bicester Village stations? Will we be consulted on these? So the short answer to that one is yes. The slightly longer answer is yes, we're in the process, as I say, of still designing these upgrades. The feedback from this consultation, as I've already said, will shape what we do next. There is going to be a further stage of consultation later on before we make our formal application for consent to undertake these works. The precise timing of that is partly dependent on a number of factors, including some of the feedback we get from this consultation. But yes, there will be a subsequent round of consultation which will provide a lot more detail and a lot more specifics on the proposals, and there is an opportunity at that stage to provide further feedback and comment on those. Okay, so that was everything that I was going to talk about. So I'll hand back to Chris, who's going to talk about plans for freight. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Stephen. So yes, in terms of freight and our plans for freight, I think it's useful first of all to talk about why we're talking about freight on the rail, and really it's due to the benefits that it can bring in a number of areas. Firstly, it reduces CO2 emissions by up to 76% compared to taking freight by road, and the petrol and the fossil fuels that lorries use. Also, taking those lorries off the roads reduces congestion. Each freight train can remove up to 76 lorries from the roads, which obviously eases that and improves safety. Due to the taking lorries off the road, rail freight would prevent an estimated 600 casualties per year from accidents involving lorries and trucks and vans. As a result, it brings huge benefits to the UK economy, estimated at £1.6 billion each year in terms of productivity gains for UK businesses. So in terms of our specific plans for freight, we have been set an objective of supporting existing freight services and making provision for potential future demand. So we need to know what that demand might look like. We're engaging with the freight operator community to talk about where their customers are, what kind of freight might be moved and might make use of the East West Rail route. But of course, we need to balance the views of freight companies and the obligations to the government with the views of local communities, which is why we're seeking feedback on this. So we'll be considering all of those issues again on the right-hand side there. So what are the available freight paths? We are building a passenger service after all. So what freight paths are left? What's the demand from the freight industry? Again, where's the source? Where are the customers? What kind of infrastructure and changes might be needed to accommodate that extra freight? And what is the potential negative impact of carrying freight on the route? How do we mitigate that? In terms of the specific questions that we've been asked, first of all, how much freight traffic will there be in terms of trains per day? Well, as I say, the current obligation that we have is to support existing freight traffic. There is already freight traffic on the route between Bicester and Oxford, so we will need to support that capacity. And as I say, examine those options regarding potential future provision of freight capacity. That's very much going to be an ongoing piece of work. And it will be subject to things that we just don't know yet in terms of the freight traffic flows, where the customers are, where the sources are. The second question, obviously quite a sensitive point, will freight trains be running 24 hours a day? And I can be absolutely clear on this, there are no plans to operate either freight services or passenger services 24 hours a day. Our hours of operation are published in the consultation document, in the customer experience and railway operations document, specifically page 33. It does show that overnight there will be no passenger service and as such no freight service either. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Tristan to talk about some of the other environmental benefits that we hope to bring.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. So hello, hello everyone. My name is Tristan. I'm one of the Environment and Sustainability team here at East West Rail. So we've got a couple of specific questions that we've been asked, which we're going to talk through. But before I do that, I'm just going to touch on some more broader points about our approach to environment and what we're trying to achieve. I think it's worth noting just before I do go into that, we do have something called our environmental sustainability policy. It's a document that sets out 9 of our key principles to what we want to achieve from an environmental sustainability perspective. Covers things like carbon, things like cultural heritage, landscape, and covers the details of what we're trying to aspire to achieve through the delivery of this railway. You can find that on our website, and I'd encourage you to go and take a look to give some reassurance about what we're trying to achieve here at East West Rail. So in terms of what's on this slide, there's a couple of points that I think are quite important for this section of the route. The first of that is around carbon. Carbon and climate change is obviously a really important topic. It's something that we're very aware of at East West Rail, and as such, we're striving to be a net zero carbon railway line in line with existing government policy. We're very much aware of the commitment to remove, or the aspiration to remove, diesel-only trains by 2040, and that's certainly something that we're considering. Whilst at this point in time, it's still very early in the programme, as we move through the next phase of the project, we'll start to develop some of our targets around our climate reduction strategies, and we'll provide a lot more detail and a lot more information on what this looks like when we come to our statutory consultation. So the other thing that I wanted to pick up off of this slide is around biodiversity net gain. For connection stage 1, hopefully you'll be aware that the Network Rail Alliance committed to a 10% net gain target. We aren't quite at the point where we have a specific target defined yet, but we have definitely committed to delivering biodiversity net gain for the railway. It's a key part of making sure that we deliver a truly sustainable form of transport for the ARC. So it's something that's very important to us and something we're doing a lot of work on. Again, similar to carbon, it's one of those things that we're still quite early in our thinking. We'll develop that as we move through the next phase of the project. And when we come to our statutory consultation, we'll have a lot more information to share on this matter. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So sustainable energy for our trains is again another quite important issue for us. As I kind of noted around carbon, these things are very intertwined. We haven't committed one way or the other yet around electrification, but we're certainly doing a lot of work to explore what sustainable energy options there are for our long-term rolling stock. And that, again, that's more information that we'll be able to provide during our next round of consultation. And then finally, at the bottom of this slide, thinking about the community and what the railway means for the community that it is going to exist in proximity with. We very much understand that there's going to be concerns around noise, around air quality, and other impacts like severance and access to public rights of way. This is something that is right off the forefront of our thinking, and it's something that we're considering as we develop our plans. One of the main principles of this sort of phase of the scheme is trying to avoid impacts, so thinking about where the alignment goes, but also about what sort of mitigation we can then implement. So we'll be thinking about the sort of noise mitigation, noise barriers, and these sorts of things as we move through the phase of the programme to make sure that we capture or we understand what the impacts are likely to be, and so we can mitigate them accordingly. And that's part of the job of this consultation, is to hear from you about some of the areas that you're aware of, the things that you're concerned about, so we can make sure we factor that into our designs, we factor that into our thinking. So if we pop on to the next slide, thank you. So I've got two specific questions, and the first one I've kind of touched on it a little bit already, and it's about using quiet electric trains and not using diesel trains. So again, this is a really important issue and a really important question for us, and there's still a lot of work and a lot of thinking that we need to do on it. But what I can say at the moment is, although no commitment has yet been made by the government to electrify the railway between Oxford and Cambridge, we will need to ensure the railway aligns with relevant policy and complies with relevant legislation related to net zero carbon and noise protection. In 2018, the government did challenge the railway to produce a vision for the removal of all diesel-only trains from the network by 2040, and we're absolutely committed to running a sustainable railway in the long term with reduced emissions, meaning carbon, nitrogen oxides, particulates, and again also about noise. To that end, we are exploring how we can introduce new and emerging technologies in our long-term train fleet, and we will be seeking input from bidders across the market to ensure they understand our environmental goals. Again, there needs to be a lot of thinking around this subject, and there's a lot of work to be done with some of our colleagues from our operations team. That's what's going to be happening in the next sort of phase of the project, and we'll be able to provide a lot more information on this during our statutory consultation. So the final question is around how we'll reduce the impact of noise. We recognise that this, as I've mentioned before, is going to be a really key concern for the communities near to the railway. We're committed to considering measures that reduce noise and vibration for these communities. And this is going to include things like the choice of trains, again, thinking about how some trains or some rolling stock could be noisier than others, and we'll consider that when we make the decisions about that rolling stock. We'll also think about track technology and factor that into our noise assessments. And we'll think about noise barriers, which form one of a number of mitigations that may be appropriate where our tracks may be likely to create heightened noise levels. We're going to be carrying out comprehensive assessments and using industry-leading commuter modelling, which can incorporate information on local topography, as well as on building heights. This simulates the potential noise and vibration impacts along the whole of the route, and it's going to help us understand what the mitigation is required and where it's going to be required. It's important to note that we are following best practice set by other schemes, as well as the government's own policy on noise, which has a number of aims, which includes avoiding significant impacts on the health and quality of life of the communities that we're going to be operating within or nearby to. This noise assessment is going to form part of our environmental statement, which will support the development consent order. It's also important to note that when we come to our statutory consultation, we'll publish something called a preliminary environmental information report. What this will do is set out what we know about the scheme at that point in time, what the design of it's likely to look like, and also what we think the likely impacts will be and how we're proposing to mitigate those. That will give you, the community and local authorities, a really good opportunity to understand in a bit more detail what those impacts are likely to be and how we're proposing to mitigate them to make sure that we meet the aspirations of our environmental policy. At this point, I think I'll wrap up and I'll hand over to Jörn, who's going to talk about information for landowners.
Thanks, Tristan. So that's right. One of the key roles of the land and property team is to consult with the landowners whose land could be potentially required by the scheme and to keep them updated on the process. With the proposals and concepts we are consulting on, there will be land requirements outside the existing bounds of the railway. And as part of our development consent order application, which is our means of gaining permission for the project, we will be seeking powers for compulsory purchase. We will always look to enter a voluntary agreement with landowners first, and compulsory purchase will be our last resort. And just to add to the timescales on this, our development consent order application is likely to be sometime between 2022 and 2024, and then there would be a review period on top of that. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, at this stage we don't know for certain that the land and property which will be needed for our proposals, and that they are at a very early stage, and we will be able to provide more information by the next round of consultation. But we do want to work with our stakeholders and our neighbouring landowners, so we can keep you updated and informed throughout the process. So now I just want to kind of go into a bit further detail on the need to sell scheme, which I discussed earlier. So points on projects such as this at the point of a development consent order submission, those landowners who own properties within the line of the proposed railway route who are unable to sell their property at market value are affected by what's known as statutory blight, and they'll be able to submit a statutory blight notice asking us to buy their property. We recognise that that's later in the programme, which is why we're consulting on the need to sell scheme. And if introduced, it's there to provide the support to those who have a pressing need to sell but who are unable to as a result of our proposals. And if introduced, it would be at the point of the preferred route or option selection point. So by the next round of consultation, which is likely to be winter 2021-2022. And then the other key difference between statutory blight and the need to sell scheme is that the need to sell scheme wouldn't be limited to the land within the line of the railway. But I mean, ultimately at this stage, we're looking for feedback on what people think. Is it the right mitigation? And if not, what kind of support you'd expect to see? We have a website with a section focused on land and property, and there you'll find a number of guides and leaflets on the need to sell scheme, but in addition to that, blight, compulsory purchase and compensation. And that's where you will also find the feedback forms, which we encourage you to return back, and also details on how to get into contact. We do have a team who can discuss all of this information over with you. So do get in touch or attend one of our live chat events, where that's a good place to ask those questions. So yeah, I hope that's of help to those landowners and the surrounding community. And I'll now pass on to Claire, who I think will discuss the consultation further, but then also start the subject of Q&As.
Thanks very much, Jan. Absolutely spot on. It's great because we've come to the point of the webinar where we have got some time to answer live questions and answers. So thank you all very much for you who have been submitting your questions. And before I wrap up with how you can get involved and talk a little bit more about the consultation, I'm going to hand over to James, who's going to moderate the live Q&A session. Over to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you to everyone who's been sending in some questions for us to cover. So I'm going to start with some questions that have come in about the concepts for the London Road level crossing, and I'm going to invite Stephen, if that's okay, to respond to these. So Stephen, the first question is, you talked about additional options. Could you consider answering whether a combination of options is possible? The exact question is, could you please consider answering combinations, for instance, concept 1 and 6?
Thanks, James. Yeah, I mean, I would suggest to the person that's asked this question, certainly could you make sure you provide sort of feedback on which options in particular you think should be combined. You said 1 and 6 in this question. Can you make sure you feed that back as a formal feedback through the feedback form, either online or via the methods that we'll mention in a moment. But yes, if there is a strong case for doing these any of these options in combination, it's certainly something we can consider. We are of course looking to deliver the right option, the option that works best for the community. So as I said previously, if there are things you think we haven't taken into account, if there are things that you think could be better about any of the options, or if, as in this case, you think we should consider a combination of the options, then please do tell us about it through the various feedback channels to the consultation.
That's great. Thanks very much, Stephen. And then a second question about the concepts has been asked, which is, how far has the suggested alternative bridge over the 2 car parks dropping back down to Station Road that I have sent details in about, how far have these been processed so far? As this is the only method that works, allows the crossing to be closed, and it doesn't require disruption to local communities.
Okay, so on that particular one, yes, we've received that particular proposal. We've seen that, we are aware of it, and we, in the same way that we will with any others that come in during the consultation, we will be taking a look at that. We haven't progressed it very far at this stage. We are still waiting to see what else is coming in through the consultation, but we'll certainly be looking at that as we move forward.
Thanks, Stephen. And just while I've got you, another question has just come in. It links to a question that you covered in the previous section around your questions answered. The question is, I understand that East West Rail are now considering a pedestrian underpass at London Road, and why is this concept not listed in the current concepts that you're consulting on? I just wonder if you'd be able to quickly touch on that. Yeah, certainly.
So to give a little bit of history on this, the idea of closing London Road level crossing has been around for quite some time. We're not the first people to suggest that. A number of organisations have looked at the closure of a level crossing over the years, including Network Rail and Oxfordshire County Council and others. We have only relatively recently come onto the scene to look at this, and we were very keen not to redo work that had already been done and reinvent the wheel. So we've picked up where others have left off. To be completely frank about it, we've started from where other organisations had got to. We presented the options that have been looked at so far, and we wanted to get feedback on those. The precise purpose of this consultation is to understand what other ideas are out there and what people think works for them. And our understanding was that the options that had been presented so far were the ones that were most likely to be to do the job and to be popular with the community. But of course, the one of the first things we've done is to consult on those options and understand what people actually think about them. We've had the message back loud and clear from a number of people that an option of a pedestrian and cyclist underpass rather is a thing that we should be looking at, and we will of course now take that forward and look at that alongside the other options. As I said, this isn't the only chance people are going to have to comment on what we're doing. There is another round of consultation later on, and at that point you'll have a further opportunity to comment on the options that we've progressed.
That's great. Thank you very much, Stephen. We'll be coming back to you because we've had a couple of questions about access, but firstly, there's some questions around the environment for Tristan that I was hoping we might be able to cover if possible. We've had a couple of questions, and I think I'll merge the first two if that's okay, because I think they're related. The first is regarding the environmental damage. How can you strive to be net zero and not install the electrification during build? And then the second question is, why can't East West Railway Company better government targets of net zero carbon?
Yeah, so they're both very good questions, and I guess again it would be great to hear this through the consultation, this sort of feedback as well. But to try to answer them specifically, we are very much in the early stages of the project at the moment, and thinking around net zero, what targets, the trajectory that we need to meet as a project to make sure that the government's able to meet its targets is something that we're working through with the Department for Transport at the moment, and with wider members from the government. No decisions yet been made around electrification, and that's certainly part of our thinking, and factoring in the carbon and climate commitments as part of our thinking. As we move forward, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, as we move forward through the programme and get towards statutory consultation, we'll have a lot more information to share on this, and be more specific about the targets that we're aiming to meet, and how we're going to do that. So that will be the opportunity to learn a lot more about this subject.
Thanks very much, Tristan. And while we've got you, there's another environmental question that has come in, which is, so we talked a lot about different concepts for the London Road level crossing. Of course, there'll be different impacts of each of those crossings, of each of those concepts. One of the questions is, will you take into account the environmental cost of building a large concrete overpass or underpass at the London Road level crossing in deciding which option is most appropriate?
Yeah, we absolutely will. So all of the kind of design decisions and development that we undertake at East West Rail considers environment right at the beginning, and also in when we weigh up the pros and cons of different options. So whether that's the embedded carbon associated with the concrete, whether it's to do with the construction methodology and the impact of local communities, or the landscape and the visual impact of that piece of infrastructure, all of those will get considered, and they'll all be weighed up in the round as part of that decision-making process to make sure we get the best option.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Tristan. That's great. I'd like to invite Stephen to answer a couple more questions, if that's okay. One is around cycle paths. There is a direct pedestrian and cycle path from Langford to the London Road level crossing. But at the very end by the railway, it narrows to only a footpath. Can this be widened? It's quicker to cycle into town from Langford than to drive.
Okay, so on the general subject of cycling and so on, one of the things that we are looking at alongside the core works on the railway itself is how people actually move around and access the railway, and in particular how they access the stations. We're looking at a range of things. They broadly come under the heading of what's known as first mile, last mile travel. So in other words, how people get from their home to the station and from a station to their eventual destination. We're putting particular emphasis on sustainable travel as part of that. So in particular, looking at walking and cycling, and also other modes of public transport, whether that be sort of conventional bus services, or perhaps more tailored things such as on-demand services that don't run to a fixed route or a fixed timetable, but operate in excuse me, in a way that meets the needs of individual people travelling to and from the station. So what we will be doing is we will be looking at the existing network of cycleways and footpaths in the area that we cover, and investigating whether there are opportunities for us to work with local authorities in particular and other stakeholders to improve some of those. And so that's certainly something we'll look at and be taking on board. At this very point in time, we're actually undertaking a study alongside England's Economic Heartland, who are the subnational transport body for the region, looking at these very issues, and this is something we'll be picking up.
That's great, thank you, Stephen. We've also had a question about about the 6 concepts. See, there's in particular, I think concept 1, which is the pedestrian only crossing. Have emergency services been considered in regard to London Road? A pedestrian only crossing will surely delay emergency services reaching Langford Village.
Okay, so to answer that one, we have considered the position with emergency services. I understand that emergency services have previously been consulted on this when some of the other groups have been looking at closing the level crossing, and have not previously raised any concerns around this. But we will ourselves be speaking to the emergency services in due course. They will be consulted about the proposals, and we will of course take on board comments that they provide to us as a result of that. We certainly wouldn't want to be creating a situation where the emergency services couldn't do their jobs. That wouldn't be our aim at all. So we will be talking to them and making sure that whatever we propose enables them to carry on doing the excellent jobs that they do.
Thanks very much. We've had another question come in about access, actually. I know you mentioned the cycle paths one. Another one's coming about, is there enough space for a bus terminus on the south side of the London Road level crossing?
Yeah, okay, so I've possibly covered part of that with what I've already said about access to and from stations and so on. And yes, we are looking at all the options there, and I mentioned bus services as part of that. The site to the south of London Road level crossing is a little bit tight, but certainly we will look at options there, and in particular we'll be talking to bus operators about how they think they can best serve some of the stations along the route. The position with London Road will of course be partly dependent on which option gets taken forward for the level crossing, and that may actually, some of these options may actually open up new opportunities to do something different with the bus services and providing facilities for buses to call at the station and to serve the area generally. So we will be looking at that, certainly.
That's great, thank you very much, Stephen. Another question we've had is around, you mentioned with London Road level crossing and safety. One question we've had is, do Network Rail and East West Railway Company have a sort of joined up safety first mantra? Because safety only really appears in the technical reports, they're saying. I think it does appear in quite some detail in the technical report, talking about some of the incidents that have taken place on this particular level crossing. But it said that there's nothing actually in the consultation document about safety. I just wondered if that's something you just wanted to touch on from a safety point of view.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, safety is at the very heart of everything we do, to the extent that every decision we ever make has got safety at the heart of it. We are fully aligned with Network Rail on matters of safety. I think we're all acutely aware of safety as a very, very high priority. I've already mentioned the Office of Rail and Road. They are the safety regulator for the railway industry, and we are answerable to them on matters of safety, in the same way that Network Rail are. We're no different in that respect. We aren't able to bypass safety legislation that applies to Network Rail, and we wouldn't want to. Our aim is to improve the safety of the railway and improve the safety of the communities that interface with the railway, whether as users of the trains and the railway, or whether just crossing the railway to go about their daily business. So although perhaps it isn't mentioned repeatedly throughout the documents that are online at the moment, please rest assured it is absolutely at the heart of everything we do.
Thanks, Stephen. That's great. I'm conscious of time, so there's one final question, which goes back to the concepts, particularly concept 6, which looks at other crossings. And can you confirm whether these other crossings would be bridges or underpasses?
Yeah, so to answer that, I think it depends very much on the individual locations and the specifics of those locations. The preference would probably be an overbridge in most of the situations, a bridge going over the railway, but we are also considering whether an underpass would be appropriate as part of that. And again, any feedback or any preferences on those would be most welcome. Part of the decision making does depend on exactly what's involved in building either an underpass or an overbridge. But we are, of course, very keen to hear on what people would prefer to see, and that applies, to those options set out in concept 6. But equally, also some of the other concepts we have got, as I said, we've got options for underpasses or overbridges, and we're really keen to hear what people would prefer in those respects, if people indeed have a view on those. So I'd really encourage anyone listening to this today to feedback your views on that as part of the consultation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Stephen. And I think that's all the questions we're going to have time for. But thank you to everyone who submitted questions as part of this webinar. And if your question wasn't picked up in this specific webinar, then obviously please do join one of the 9 remaining live chat sessions that are taking place between now and the end of consultation, where individual specific questions can be asked in an interactive live Q&A with our technical experts. So thank you very much. And
oh, I think the wonders of technology. James disappeared, but thank you very much, James and Stephen. And yes, thank you very much for your questions. Great that we had time today to answer those. So how you can get involved. There are lots of different ways you can get involved in the consultation. And it's just extremely important that you take a look at the information online. Please look at all the different documents. You've probably seen, you will have already received a copy of our summary document. Please look at the virtual consultation room. There's so much information there for you to look at, because we just really want to understand your views, and we want to receive your feedback about this consultation, because your views are very important to us and they will shape the future of this project, the railway line. So James mentioned our live chat events. If you've got further questions, please do come along to our live chat event, where our experts are lined up or ready to take your questions, and you can have a conversation. It's a dialogue. So we hope to see you at one of our live chat events. Please go to our website and you will see that the live chat event function is within the virtual consultation room. And if the event isn't actually open, you can still leave your question and we will get back to you. We understand that not everybody is online and not everybody is comfortable in the digital space. So please take a note of this telephone number and give it to anybody in your community or your next door neighbour who you feel may not be taking part because we're actually online at the moment, because obviously we'd prefer to meet with you face to face, but we're not able to with the current restrictions. And yes, we have a feedback form. We encourage you to get back to us. The closing date is the 9th of June for the consultation, so please make sure you get back to us by that date. Next slide, please. So how you can respond to the consultation. Our feedback forms can be submitted online by emailing us at consultation@eastwestrail.co.uk, or you can send a hard copy to us at Free Post East West Rail. If you would like a paper copy of the form, please contact us at contact@eastwestrail.co.uk or calling us on our telephone number. And we've got a dedicated team who are looking forward to speaking with you, who will be pleased to help you. Next slide, please. Basically, please stay in touch. It is so important that we get your views. So we've had a good number of consultation responses to date, and we're looking forward to many, many more. Please get in touch if you've got any questions or queries. And thank you very much for attending today. So I'll say goodbye from myself and the rest of the team, and I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you and goodbye.